All right. I appreciate you all for dialing in and spending your next hour with us. I'm very excited to dig in about this topic. We hit the next slide, please. So before we start, I'm going to jump into it in a moment, but of course I have some really important notes to share as we are all joining on this webinar. Oh, South Africa, so impressive. Thanks for joining us. I know the time zone's kind of crazy, but anyway, okay, I focus. So because of the size of the webinar, as you can see, and folks from all over the world joining in, attendees are automatically muted. And to enable closed captioning for yourself, please click the CC button at the bottom of your webinar window, which you can see on the screen here. And then we also want to hear from you throughout the session. So please leave comments in the Q&A widget. We have the team working behind the scenes to help answer your questions. And then just because I know this is always the #1 question that we get, so getting ahead of it, we will be recording this webinar and sharing it out. And so don't worry about taking notes or having to have the recording. We will be sending it out. So don't worry there. Okay. All right. So to kick off with introductions, my name is Rachel and I lead product marketing for B2B at Grammarly. And so as part of my role, my team and I, we really study Gen AI trends as it relates to the workplace. And we partner, with different folks in our organization, like our product team as an example, to come up with ways to make Grammarly more valuable for your organizations and making sure we're staying on top of the newest technology and help Grammarly can help each organization communicate a lot more effectively. And so with that, I'd like to hand it off to Rowan to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm so happy to be here with you today and with everybody from all over the world. I'm very impressed that some folks are joining in the middle of the night. My name's Rowan Curran. I'm a senior analyst at Forrester Research, and I cover a variety of topics under the AI and machine learning aegis. And specifically, I lead Forrester's coverage on generative AI from the technology side. Super excited to talk to you all today about this topic.
Thank you so much, Rowan. So Rowan is is a close partner to us. He's a friend of Grammarly. We just have worked together on various research and things like that. And so I'm very excited to hear about the latest that you have to share in AI, Rowan. So we'll dig into that in a bit. So here's what we plan to cover today. I'll share some trends that we at Grammarly are observing in the market for the need for employee AI readiness. And then I'll hand it over to Rowan to share some deeper learnings from Forrester. And then we'll talk about how we scale AI adoption along with employee readiness. How do we bring people along for the journey as this new technology gets developed and more sophisticated over time? And then lastly, as long as time permits, we will try to answer the questions from the audience. Okay, so why are we all here? Why did we all jump on this webinar in the morning and the evening to talk about AI and employee readiness? So what we found is that there is a disconnect in the appetite and the pace of AI adoption by businesses and the ability for employees to effectively use these tools. So regardless of any new technology, people have to be at the center of that strategy. They need to get comfortable with it. They need to be seeing meaningful value in their day-to-day, and it needs to be seamless within their existing behaviors and processes, at least at first. And as Rowan will discuss more in a second, there is a tremendous opportunity in Gen AI for enterprises specifically, but it will only be realized if the entire workforce is equipped to make the most out of these tools. So in our previous research that we've done with Forrester, we found that 71% of business leaders are in the process of implementing or plan to implement Gen AI within the next 24 months. And even more so, 90% of those business leaders said that they need a tool that works across their entire organization. So kind of a tall order here. And this is where we're starting to see the disconnect. So when you look at employees who will actually be using these tools, more than half would actually say that they don't know how to use AI. They haven't quite figured it out yet. And so if we drill into that data from our 2024 State of Business Communication report, we can see that AI literacy or AI readiness, these are terms that we use interchangeably, will vary widely across the organization based on different slices and demographics. So this is just like a really quick slice that you're seeing here, but to kind of set the definition of what it means to be AI literate, What we consider that at Grammarly is AI literate professionals have a strong understanding of Gen AI. They know how to use it effectively, and they are aware of its they're aware of its limitations and how to use it regularly for their jobs, knowing that. And what we see, as you can see in this table, looking at the different cuts that we've looked at, there is a good portion of the workforce that is completely avoiding AI for some reason or another. Could be, they're not ready to adopt new tools. They don't quite trust it yet. There's a level of overwhelm from the availability out there. Meanwhile, only a couple of groups would say that they are, more than half are operating at an AI literate level. And so the goal is to understand where these gaps are, having to look at these different populations within the workforce, and how do we get everyone to the same level? How do we get everyone to a same understanding so that everyone is using it more effectively and very more comfortable with this kind of technology and what it's going to mean for their day-to-day and where it fits. So when leaders consider, their organization-wide AI implementation plans, as 9 out of 10 leaders are, it's critical to also plan for the change management required for employee readiness across that entire workforce. So again, keeping people at the center because that success is dependent on them. And with that, I will actually hand it over to Rowan to dive into this unique moment in time for businesses and how employee AI readiness is going to be key for their success.
Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly talk a bit about how we can look at the measurement of the impact of some of these generative AI capabilities, how it's impacting organizations, and then we'll look at what Forrester calls AIQ, or the AI quotient, essentially a way to look at an analog of how literate your organization is in AI. But to kind of kick us off here, we're really seeing generative AI kind of extend its impacts well beyond business. We've probably already seen it inveigle its way into our personal lives, perhaps our educational lives, depending upon what stage we are at. But really, it's starting to, fit its way kind of all over the place. And so that means that we're all going to need to understand how to use these tools. Now, where this zeitgeist came from wasn't just the introduction of a new series of models. The GPT 3.5 series of models that drove ChatGPT were, very powerful, but it was really that application user experience that drove the explosion, and it drove tons of user adoption. And that's what got us all very excited about, the huge potential impacts that these tools could have on ourselves, on our broader workforces, and on our companies. But today, that type of experience is no longer sufficient to meet our enterprise needs. You can't just have, a commercial public-facing tool, or even, just a totally off-the-shelf capabilities to deliver all of the enterprise needs that you need, or that you want to have delivered by generative AI tools. So we're seeing a greater need for both kind of the enterprise strategy, as Rachel was talking about before, as well as a greater need to work with employees to implement these more effectively to get the most benefit out of them. But in terms of how folks are actually using these tools today, I'm sure you've heard many anecdotes around this, but when we look at some of the initial data that we have around this from our global workforce survey, and we look at over 1,600 employees that are already using generative AI, we can see that more than half of them are using it to find information, a little over half of them are using it to synthesize information, and another half are using it for text and content generation. And we see this borne out in how use cases are built out. So we're really seeing tons of folks really take advantage of these tools to improve the way that they are creating written content and communications and working together within their enterprise context. So we're seeing this, across various forms of, marketing and sales content and all of these other types of corporate communications.
Rowan,
Now,
just pause you back
yeah,
there on that slide. I really love to dig into this point, the different use cases. I think this is consistent with
yeah.
research that we found on our own as well, in how people are engaging with different Gen AI tools. To your point, it seems to be, obviously focused around in written communication and how teams are using Gen AI to automate and get smarter about all of that. So when you look at these set of use cases on this list, like ideation, synthesizing information, that type of thing, how do you think about like productivity? And you're probably getting to it in the future, but how do you think about like productivity in that sense? And do all of these ladder up to, how is it going to ultimate impact that these different use cases are going to drive in these organizations? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I look at these as more of capabilities than overall use cases, I guess I would say. Because when we think about these things, it's how people are actually going to apply them in the organization that we're going to be able to measure what that true productivity benefit is. So, for me in my job, there's, huge productivity benefit to be using generative AI for, research and information retrieval and things of that nature. But there's perhaps, a little bit less value in my current job for using for code gen and reviewing things and things along those lines. So I think when we're thinking about the productivity piece, and I will talk about it in the coming slides, we really need to be specific about what task we are trying to identify the gains in around this. Because even though we need to take a kind of broad enterprise-wide approach, we need to be specific about how we're thinking about the gains for each one of our employees. So to that end, the productivity benefits that we have, vary across a variety of factors. And some of those factors are, within our control as employees and managers at enterprises, and some of those are outside of our control. So we have things like employee salary that, to a degree within our control, but really when you look at that, that's saying, okay, if I'm going to have a generative AI solution that's going to save, let's say, 20 minutes a day in terms of content generation and communications. That 20 minutes per day is a very different dollar amount if we're talking about an employee who's paid $200,000 a year versus an employee who's paid, $100,000 a year. So when you're looking at the productivity benefits, you have to tie it into who that employee is and what they're trying to execute and what that employee's time is actually worth when you're looking at time savings, which is why I think, when you look at time savings as a benefit, we like to dial it in more to specific tasks and things of that nature to get it a bit more specific. But then we have things around risk level, which ties into the subsequent piece around AIQ level. But when we're looking at the risk level of these tools, we're seeing most enterprises at this point in time deploy tools that are primarily employee facing. And for any of the customer facing tools, it's oftentimes with a human in the loop in order to validate and verify the content before it hits the final end user point. This third area around here, around the productivity or around the AIQ level that I'll get into much more detail on in the next few slides, is really around understanding what is the ability of your employees to properly leverage these tools so that they can use them safely, effectively, and to actually increase the revenue or decrease the cost of your business. And then again, we have this measurement around hours saved. So this ties directly into that point I was making before around linking the productivity benefits more to tasks and the hours saved there rather than just to the overall time savings. So you want to look at kind of discrete tasks for how the productivity benefits come in here. And when we do look at that, it tends to be much easier to understand the impact of these tools. But the way that companies are actually bringing these tools into their companies varies. We have kind of four main routes for this. Bring your own AI, which I'll talk a bit more about in the next slide, is really around thinking about the fact that your employees are already using these tools, whether it be ChatGPT or Claude or any of these other tools that are out there and available on the web, and how you are thinking about governing this, how you're thinking about managing it, and making sure that they're doing things responsibly. So that's every business that needs to think about that. So if you don't have a BYO AI approach in place, it's going to leave you in just as vulnerable position as if you didn't have a BYOD, bring your own device approach in the 2010s. But where we're seeing probably most projects today, even though we are seeing a lot of folks develop and engineer their own pre-trained model, most projects fall in terms of getting generative AI embedded into other software packages. And that comes into broad-based productivity and communication support applications, along with CRM applications, customer service support applications, all of these different tools that are incorporating generative AI as a functionality rather than as a kind of standalone capability that folks are building out themselves. And that is really where we're seeing a lot of folks find success because while there was a huge amount of excitement for kind of building your own generative AI capability at the beginning of this, many companies, unless they have significant development resources, are really relying more so on these kind of vendor provided capabilities in the short term. And if they can't get to those vendor provided capabilities, or even if you are getting them, you still want to have this BYO AI policy that I was talking about in place. And when we talk about a BYO AI policy, this is really the first step in helping your employee set, helping your entire enterprise understand what the capabilities, what the limits, and what the proper usage of AI tools is. And so even though this is not about, how are you leveraging a embedded commercial tool, this is going to be that kind of first step into increasing the literacy level and the AIQ level of your overall organization.
Rowan, just to pause a bit here on that table that you just showed, I'm curious, like, where do you think, in your observation, where do you think a lot of these organizations are falling today? Is it really in kind of the left-hand side, the BYO AI tongue twister
Yeah.
side of it, or is it like, are you seeing, a few leaders of the pack really in that option three bucket? Like, where do you see the spread of where companies are falling based on your observations in the market?
So if we're talking about the spread of enterprise companies, I would say that, if we're looking at option three, that is probably less than 1% at this time,
Yeah.
though it is growing admittedly. Option two, the second from the right, we are seeing a lot of folks doing this, but that's not, you can't build everything yourself. And you don't want to build everything yourself. So honestly, like the way that we're seeing this come into enterprises, most commonly is through capabilities that are within other software packages that companies have already bought for some other purpose. So, some of the ones that I mentioned before, but it, even goes out as far as like contract lifecycle management vendors and folks like that that are in, industries that you might not expect to, be offering direct generative AI capabilities to their clients, but they are, and that's much easier than, somebody in your accounting department going and building a retrieval augmented generation application just to kind of get better understanding of like what contracts might be in violation of certain compliance and what might not be. So definitely we're seeing a lot of folks interested in these embedded capabilities, which, I think it makes a lot of sense in the overall arc of these things. We are certainly in a time where a lot of folks are being very careful about their optimizations and are really trying to make sure that they understand how to get the value out of this stuff today,
Yeah,
which is partially
absolutely.
why we're here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for digging into that point.
Awesome. Fantastic. So getting back into the BYOAI piece briefly. So when we look at this, there's kind of four main pieces. So there's helping folks understand, what steps they need to take to secure their environments and, use data with proper privacy controls in place. That basic literacy about understanding how AI works and how to work with it. And the overall usage to understand how folks are actually leveraging these tools, which not only is a good way of kind of directing best behaviors, but also that's a very good way of building a set of potential use cases for your organization because you're basically hearing from folks how they're already using these tools today, even if they're not using fully sanctioned tools. And then also that fourth component of how you're going to support BOAI moving forward. So once you do fold in some more enterprise-based capabilities, how are you going to direct people off of those individually sourced capabilities, or how are you going to kind of sunset the use of those things? So there's a lot of different elements in here for just the BYOAI piece. But that's just kind of the beginning component here, but it's really critical to think about these things because when we look at the generative AI space, there's obviously enthusiasm coming from the bottom up and the top down. And actually, in our recent survey that we did on this, we found that CEOs were leading the generative AI strategies, something like 37% of the time from the business side and 13% from the technology side. So definite interest from the very high level, as well as many of us on this call are individual contributors, and we have a lot of interest in this as well. So BYOAI, as well as the AIQ that I'm going to dig into in a few minutes, is a really good way of kind of capturing this really strong dynamic momentum that we have in place now. And again, what this is moving towards is generative AI capabilities being embedded everywhere. So it's really incumbent upon us to help our organizations better understand how to use these tools in the same way that it was incumbent upon us, let's say starting in the late 2000s, early 2010s, to help our organizations become more familiar with basic data analytics and dashboarding to make better decisions within our organizations. This is the same type of shift to becoming more collectively intelligent as companies.
And Rowan, I have a question for you
Yeah.
on that point. As we see more companies introducing like generative capabilities embedded directly into their tools, I see a different challenge in which like everyone's going to offer AI something. There's so much there's so many options and every tool has their own AI tool. So how do you recommend like organizations approach that challenge around like the volume of options that are at their disposal? And each AI tool has their own model and way of doing things. And so how do you think about organizations rationalizing all of that volume that is expected to come in?
Well, so I will say that that is a moving target right now.
Mhm.
And I actually have kind of ongoing conversations with our clients who are trying to figure out this exact problem. So, one of the core things that they're looking at is saying, all right, do we want to have kind of like an API abstraction layer that manages all the models that we interact with, all the services, or do we want to do it kind of application by application? And, you know, we're seeing organizations kind of fall on both sides of that. I think one way that it's more likely to happen is that we'll have that kind of management layer at the top end, but then for generative AI capabilities that are embedded directly within applications, um, we're seeing more and more providers have a strong perspective on what model should be used in their applications. So, like in
Mm,
late 2022 or late 2023, sorry, we had a lot of folks that were saying, okay, we're going to have a capability where you can bring whatever model you want, and you just plug it in, it'll be fine and go. And while we do have many folks still offering that, um, when I talk to a lot of our clients, the challenge seems to be, we need guidance around how to best leverage and implement and use these tools. We don't have the time to go out and do the experimentation and the testing and all the stuff that is necessary to do that on our
right.
own. So what my advice to folks would be to work with vendors and providers that you trust as the first step here, because there's, as we were just talking about, everybody's folding in these capabilities, so there's not necessarily a reason to kind of scour the earth when it might be right in your own backyard. And then the other piece is to kind of understand like what the kind of vendor's perspective on the models is, and if it's something that they can handle for you in a way that is acceptable to your risk profile. So, one of the things that organizations are going to have to do is kind of understand what the nature of the models that folks are using under the hood are.
Thanks so much for elaborating on that. I did get a question that I thought would be helpful to answer in real time. So, can you reiterate the definition of the BYO AI piece of it? Um,
Yes, absolutely. I'm so sorry for everybody that I just blasted right through that definition. So BYOAI is bring your own AI. And we can think of this as analogous to bring your own device, or BYOD, that we had in the 2010s. If you're not familiar with that, that was essentially around once all of us got pretty high quality smartphones in our pockets, we started wanting to use them for work, and that freaked out a lot of IT departments quite rightly. And so we have a similar situation now where many of us, want to use various generative tools, but our organizations haven't necessarily implemented a tool to do that. And so folks are going out and using one of the publicly available commercial tools that are out there, and there's lots of potential risk introduced by that type of usage. And so what we're seeing at organizations is they're issuing specific policies around how to interact with the public tools. Oftentimes it's, straightforward things like don't put our business information into it, don't put our client information into it. But then sometimes it's like don't ask it questions related to RFIs and things of that nature. Because even asking questions in certain ways might reveal some of your corporate information to a public tool that you might not want it to be revealed to. But essentially, this is a challenge that all organizations are dealing with right now. So having a policy around how folks are going to bring their own AI or how you're going to manage that, we're seeing as a really essential component of this overall strategy. And I hope that helped folks understand that a bit better. Oh, and sorry, just one more detail on that. And when we see the BYOAI policy, oftentimes there's a component of both text as well as image generation that are handled separately because kind of the models around them are quite different at this point in time.
And
But
something
with
related
that,
to that
yeah,
point, kind of, sorry to cut you off there. I was
no,
like,
no,
we're
no, sorry.
between the BYO AI conversation and then this one around like everything becoming embedded with it. I think what we're also seeing, just from Grammarly's perspective is like, it's important to be, because we have a unique perspective having operating with, across so many different applications. And so it's going to be important to be directly in employees like flow of work and leveraging. It's going to be more important, I think, for these capabilities to leverage organizational context. And you can only have that if you are, have a full view of an employee's workday versus like kind of being in your own silos. So I think to your point, there are different avenues. I think metaphor you gave around the analytics dashboards, when that became a huge thing and everyone offers their own piece of it. So how do you bring it all together? We're going to see a similar trend. And if there's ways that tools or ways that we can actually have tools that are a bit more agnostic and look at across the employees' full workflows and workdays, that'll be, I think it'll be important for them to connect the dots across these tools. So we can move on in this point, but wanted to share kind of what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Definitely seeing similar things to that myself.
Mhm.
With the embedded capabilities, now we're going to talk a bit about sort of how we can think about this as applying to our employees and how we can help them out. So in our survey of generative AI decision makers from earlier this year, we asked them about their AI strategy and what components were involved there. And quite unfortunately, a plan for AI literacy and training was, fourth from the top of the most included elements, which well, as good as it's more than half, that's still, significantly less than a portion that we would hope to have in this context, because, using these tools is not easy. Using these tools for a business context is not easy. It is easy to use them kind of for, your generic personal uses and stuff like that. But really, when it comes to a business context, we need some more guidance and support. And so one of my colleagues kind of describes it this way, and I really like it. AI success really depends upon people. We could have two organizations with the same technology set, almost the same data set, and they could have really different business results just based upon the people and how the people were using these tools, the way that they were understanding the skills, ethics, and the processes around these AI systems. And so to better help organizations, be that company that has the much more successful business result around this, uh, we have developed the AIQ, or the artificial intelligence quotient. And essentially, what the artificial intelligence quotient is, and I'll say my colleague JP Gowner is the primary developer of this, and he developed it out of a similar assessment that he did for robotic process automation in the late 2010s, called the RQ. And so essentially, what this is a set of assessments, questions, and strategies for organizations to assess and to start improving the quality of their hard skills, soft skills, understanding, and risk management and awareness within their organization around AI. So when we look at assessing AIQ, we kind of do it the same way that you would do a standard IQ test of any type. We ask a bunch of questions. And so uh, in the context of the AIQ, we present these questions both to employees and leaders, because both of these elements interact and are really crucial to being successful in generative AI deployments. So for employees, it's really important to understand, when to question the output of AI and understand how it works. And for leaders, it's important to make sure that they know that their employees know how it works and when to question it. But on the leader side, it is also important for them as employees to understand sort of how to question the output of tools and when to question the output of employees' work around this. So it's not just the employee responsibility, not just the leader responsibility, but that understanding piece is just the beginning. Then we get into, some of the more specifics around hard skills and training. So assessing whether, our organization has an understanding at an individual and a group level of what prompt engineering and some of the other techniques to interact with models are. You don't need to know all of the super advanced prompt engineering techniques like chain of thought reasoning and plan to solve reasoning and things of that nature, but you do need to have an understanding of, the basic interaction of natural language querying of these tools, how to ask them for outputs, and then ideally, organizations will have a formal training around how to use this for work. What we have seen at organizations, unfortunately, is a lot of folks will basically just kind of throw these generative AI tools out there in a pilot form and not have, and say, see how it can improve your day-to-day work life, and not have a really clear training regime and training session for helping folks get the most value out of this. And we wouldn't have had the huge adoption of ChatGPT if these tools weren't relatively easy to use in some ways. But when it comes to, kind of maximizing your workflow and whatnot, you do need some help and support and some peer insights and contribution to that. Now, once we have a good idea of like the hard skills, then we can move into the soft skills and inclinations as well. And this is, much more around things like being able to adapt to the new environments of using these tools, how to articulate your needs and goals to the system, and being motivated to use the system. And being motivated to use the system also ties into ideas of psychological safety and feeling like you are comfortable and safe in your job, and that you using this tool is not essentially you training something that is going to replace you down the road. But I think one of the other pieces of this that we don't think about enough when we're looking at change management in AI in particular is that when you're adopting these new tools, even if it's the simplest, most like pleasant to use, GUI, natural language tool, there's going to be a period of time where you have to get worse at your job to get better at your job. And that kind of motivation can be hard to get over at organizations. So there's many different pieces in the soft skill element to really hone in your employees to help them get the most out of these tools and be the most productive with them. And then to kind of round it out, around this ethics and risk and privacy awareness, these are broader questions that an organization, not just for the individual employees, but also for leaders and the broader and the governance organization as well. So in the past, risk assessments, compliance, things of that nature, whether a model was targeting people improperly was really the purview of a technical team and maybe a very kind of tightly controlled risk management team. Today, this expands to a much larger set of employees who are interacting with non-deterministic tools and are going to need to understand the challenges associated with them. That's not to say that these tools are inherently risky in and of themselves, but that the risks and the uncertainty are not necessarily those that employees are used to dealing with all the time. And then they need to understand the question or the privacy concerns around AI, as well as the security concerns. And this doesn't mean to be fearful or hesitant to use it, but it's really to kind of understand both how it exists within your own internal ecosystems, kind of your own handling of data within your organization, whether that's PII, PHI, et cetera, as well as understanding the privacy concerns on a kind of more jurisdictional and global level. So if you're a global company and you're thinking about rolling out a generative AI tool, you might have to have a different rollout plan in the EU than you do in North America because of the GDPR. So there's all kinds of different elements around being more literate around risk and ethics and awareness that are more around adoption and rollouts rather than around kind of the tool itself. But with all that said, that kind of brings us to what the AIQ represents. And when we survey folks around how confident they feel in their own AIQ level, it's not super high. So when we look at hard skills, we see 45% of folks say that they know what prompt engineering is and how to use it. When we look at the soft skills, we see slightly more than half of folks feeling confident about adapting to AI-based systems for work. That's a good number, but not as high as we would like. But then when we look at a kind of more macro level, kind of an organizational level, we see that a lot of organizations kind of perceive themselves as being very high AIQ with still a majority having medium and low levels of AIQ. And while that might seem like, oh, wow, 47% of folks already have high AIQ, that's really great. That is very good, but one of the things about the AIQ is that we're going to be kind of changing and iterating on it over time because of the way that the space changes. So, even if you are in a good place right now, this is one of these things where you need to have continuous learning and improvement in order to get the most out of these tools that you're leveraging. And then, when we look at sort of how folks are approaching these things at organizations, we see that the numbers, again, are not matching up to the success that we would hope to see. So we see less than half of employees are actually going through formal training around AI for work. And yet that is somehow not at all matched up to leaders' perceptions around whether they are giving effective formal training to their employees, with almost 60% saying that they are. So leaders and employees who are on this call, I think kind of reconciling this disconnect is really important in terms of seeing success in the implementation of these tools. And formal training is just one element of it, but it's a very obvious space to see the rift between these two different sets of folks. So I know I've dumped a lot of information on you in a short period of time, AIQ, the productivity benefits, et cetera. But I want to leave you with sort of how to apply this within your organization, where we're seeing successes today. So At the beginning, I talked a bit about the text generation and things of that nature as some of the functionality pieces. But when we look at some of the common use cases that these are being applied to, they really build upon those core functionalities. So we see tons of use cases in writing and communication support. We see folks that are using this to improve their time to market, quality of communications internally, quality of communications with their customers. This kind of feeds into content summarization and transformation, where we're seeing tons of folks use generative AI to summarize call transcripts, whether that be from customer service calls or from live meeting calls, to transform content. So taking, say, a white paper and turning it into a blog post, a LinkedIn post, and some other piece of content as well. And then these two first sets of use cases also bleed into this much larger set of use cases that we're seeing emerge around knowledge retrieval and search. So these are use cases that support writing communications types of use cases. Oftentimes they summarize and transform content, but it's all about pulling back knowledge and delivering it to that end user in a more effective way. So you may have heard of architectures like this implemented around retrieval augmented generation and things of that nature. But really, the reason that I'm kind of calling out these use cases for you is because they build upon what people say they're already using the generative AI tools for. And so if we listen to our users and we take an enterprise-based approach to this, we can really start to capture that energy and maximize the outcomes that we're seeing from this in our organizations today. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Rachel.
Thanks so much. I just want to touch on that last point you made. You made a lot of great points, and so we covered a lot of ground. So I think two things. One thing that I appreciate is that you, you and Forrester Research have done a lot of like investigation into this space, and there's no, we're all kind of figuring this out together, and there is no playbook for what this means in the future. But I do appreciate that you are sharing these insights in real time as we develop them, and under tying them back to past tech trends that we've seen. And so just wanted to thank you for all the analysis and the work that you and the team have done to help people make sense of all of this new technology and how it's going to help. And then the second point I want to kind of double click on that you mentioned is these are some of the organic use cases that we've seen when this new technology came on the scene that people continue to get value from. And so it's going to be imperative for organizations to be responsive to that user behavior and where they're naturally kind of going to maximize those benefits. So I think all of these points, these are trends that we see in at Grammarly as well. So I think it was a great point that you mentioned that we're seeing, we have to listen to the users, be real about where they're finding that leverage and how do we help them unlock that. All right, if we can move it.
And on the other side of that, I also just want to point out we have to listen to users when they're saying things are not working out very well. Because this tool is super useful for so many things, but there are some places where it's not the most useful thing. And so using it the most judicious way is going to get us the best results.
Yeah, and we have a lot, like a huge conversation about this at Grammarly. It's like, where does it augment what you do, and versus like, we're not looking to replace everything around communication, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but how does it, what I've attended different roundtables and things like that, where what I'm hearing from a lot of leaders is how do I augment and upskill my workforce to understand this technology well enough to know where it's going to augment their day to day. So knowledge retrieval, like finding information. We spend over half our workday finding information. And if you're like me, if I open up a Google Drive trying to find a file, I get distracted with something else and then I completely forget where I was. And so a lot of that context switching, a lot of that, knowledge retrieval, that's something that AI can help with. They can just pull the relevant file where I'm thinking of without me getting distracted myself from my own workday. So some of these, where these efficiencies are going to happen, it's important to be aware of that. So, okay, if we can move to the next slide, please. So with that, I think to kind of couch where Rowan left off in terms of the most common use cases that we're seeing, I think we have to think about one thing that I want to impart on this group is to think about, you can't just think of AI in a silo. You have to think about the whole communication experience. And so every communication in an organization has to consider like the various dimensions to be in order for that piece of communication or conversation to be delivered effectively, and whether it's historical context, the channel that you're using, the goals you're trying to achieve, or team dynamics that you're operating within. Employees have to hold a lot of that context in their minds in order to avoid miscommunication flare-ups. And that's a tall order to ask of any employee with the volume and the pace that we work these days. And so it's not just about, text generation, because that can also then create a lot of noise with the ease and of how, generative AI has been able to produce outputs very quickly. It can create a lot of noise in the workplace. So to dial it down to kind of the most important fundamentals organizations need to get right, it's getting the right communication is about getting the right information to the right person at the right time to deliver a desired outcome. And as Rowan mentioned earlier, you have to be thoughtful about empowering your workforce while setting proper guardrails for how employees should engage with these tools safely and productively. So what does that look like kind of in reality, and what should you be looking for? What are some of those controls and guardrails you should be looking for? So Grammarly, we recently actually launched a set of capabilities to address these trends and challenges that we're seeing today in the market. As we talked about earlier, 9 out of 10 leaders say that they need a Gen AI tool that works across their organization in order for it to be successful. And most of those leaders also plan to implement some sort of solution in the next 24 months. Um, and so something that Rowan touched on is that everyone, benefits differently based on their roles and what's needed and expected of their roles. And so things like custom roles that we introduced recently can help ensure employees have the appropriate level of access for their roles. Because, we need to empower them, but they're going to see different benefits and not everyone needs access to the same information. And so you need more of those granular roles and permissions to make sure that they're operating off of the information that they need to get their role to need to do their jobs. Secondly, and something that is very top of mind that we know from talking to different leaders and organizations, and very top of mind for everyone is in this Gen AI conversation, is security, and specifically things like granular security controls to again manage a level of access as needed for different for people to perform their specific functions. Data encryption, like bring your own key and session timeout. So especially when it comes to your organization's data, how it's being used, and who might have access to your work devices, you want to be able to put trust in the vendor that you're using to have a strong, responsible AI policy that has enterprise-grade security in place. And so last thing that I'll touch on here is, for those that are unfamiliar with Grammarly, like today's conversation about communicating in the workplace, the role of AI, are topics that we investigate deeply, obsessively almost. And we partner with experts like Rowan at Forrester to deepen our understanding and how we help organizations make the most out of this new technology, and also how to bake it into our own products so that we can help everyone in the organization communicate effectively. So for those that are unfamiliar with Grammarly or kind of how we operate in the enterprise space, we are a communication intelligence solution that connects and align your business. So we spend about 88% of our work week just communicating, and that's over messages, over docs, over Zoom. And the best investment an organization can make in their productivity is on communication, because that is the thing that we are spending the most time on. Organizations run on communication. And we help thousands of teams solve those challenges that we talked about today. So if we click, we have 15 years of experience in AI-powered communication, not just when Gen AI came into the scene. We've always had AI as part of our solution. And so given that, depth of experience, the accuracy and the sophistication you experience from Grammarly are only possible through years of training advanced AI and machine learning models alongside a team of linguists who infuse best practices into the model. So a concept that's important to us that Rowan also mentioned is human in the loop. Like, you have these models that can automate a lot of things. They can be really smart, but still have to have a human in the loop, which is why we still have a team of linguists that make sure those best practices and nuances of communication are baked in. The second thing is that we work everywhere teams do across over 500,000 web and desktop apps. And so whether you're moving between email, Slack, Docs, Asana, what have you, we do follow you throughout your workday. And so that's why we are able to gather insights around trends and what people are doing and how to make people more efficient in their workday. And then lastly, we're trusted by over 1/3 of the Fortune 500 to power their communications every day. And so with that said, I believe you should see a poll on the screen very shortly. And if you would like to learn more about Grammarly, can help your organization adopt Gen AI safely and at scale, or to learn how you can improve your organization's communications as a whole, just please select yes in the poll. And I'll give everyone a couple of moments to do that. All right, and so kind of to wrap here, oops, sorry, my screen moved. All right, sorry to wrap here. We covered a lot of ground today, a lot of data, a lot of insights, lot of trends and best practices that we shared. So here are some principles to help you, build up your AI literacy and stay ahead of the curve. So the first is to dig into, to understand the LLMs that your vendors are deploying, the ones that you're using. We see a lot of people leveraging the tools that are embedded in leveraging AI from the applications that are naturally embedded. And so it's important to understand, not at a super deep level, because it's hard for us to all be data scientists, but at least, understanding like how they're using your organization's data and how that's feeding into the model. The quality of the output is only going to be strong as the quality of the data set. And so just having that high level understanding of what's feeding those vendors' LLMs and how they're using organizations' data is paramount. The second thing is, as Rowan mentioned, AI is table stakes at this point. And so the next horizon is being able to get smarter and leveraging AI that incorporates your organization's unique context in an accurate and meaningful way. Even within the market, we're seeing different companies approach this now, and there's different questions around the quality and things like that. And so this is kind of going to be the ones who can nail it right, it'll provide meaningful impact in an organization's workday. So the quality of the output is also heavily reliant on the context that you're operating in. And so it's important in order for do that, in order to have a solution that is going to be accurate, knows your organization really in depthly, you need a solution that is in the flow of your work and working across the systems that you're already working from. And then lastly, we are seeing productivity gains, as we've talked about, but that looks different for everyone, and depending on the team that you're operating in and what KPIs you have. And so, I think I saw in the chat or in the Q&A someone mentioned that we haven't really set productivity metrics. The leadership is just so excited to implement AI, which is very important, and it's such a good sign that they're embracing new technology. But it is important to get specific. So each team has their own set of KPIs. AI has benefits for the entire organization. And so it's important to measure what matters most to your team and be able to track those results over time. For some of you, that might mean time, that might mean review cycles when it comes to reviewing written work, things like that. And so it's important to get clear on where you might think those efficiencies will happen or will come from, and understanding and then being able to use that as a baseline to improve over time. And so with that, we will spend a few moments on the Q&A. All right, let's see what we got here. Okay, I see this first question around, actually I see this one. I'm going to tackle this one first. So Rowan, I think this question is for you, but where can senior execs learn AI 101? Like if they're just getting started or trying to wrap their heads around it, what are some resources to help them get up to speed?
Of course, technology failure. So I would obviously direct towards Forrester's work on this. We have a number of different documents, including Q&A for tech execs on generative AI. We have the executives primer on machine learning and AI. We have a number of different docs on this. And for folks that aren't Forrester clients, we also have a number of different kind of blogs that lay these things out, different components of it. So I recently, yesterday, day before yesterday, just published a pair of blogs on retrieval augmented generation and how those fit into enterprise generative AI. And I have a number of others with some of my colleagues on how this affects the security operations center, how it affects creativity and things of that nature. So I definitely recommend those places to start with. And then I also think that honestly, Hugging Face's resources on transformers and deep learning overall is a really good place for folks that are semi-technical and want to kind of skip a lot of the predictive AI like modeling jargon stuff and just start to understand generative AI specifically, I think that's a good place to start as well.
All right, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And so this next question is, some staff are hesitant to start using Gen AI. So how do we help them get buy-in and increase their literacy? Rowan, I'll toss that one to you.
So I think that a lot of this comes down to the understanding, like what I was talking about at the top, like the understanding of what the tools are and what their capabilities are. So a lot of the conversations that I have with folks who are hesitant or who are reticent about the risk they might be incurring, this comes from I mean, place that a lot of fears come from just the unknown, where people don't have an understanding of sort of how data is going to move back and forth, how these tools are going to be leveraged by the partners that are providing to them and things of that nature. So I would say that for organizations that are kind of going into this, like have an understanding of what your security and risk profiles are around this stuff from the get-go, so that you can go into conversations and say, all right, we have this idea for this generative AI capability. It's from this provider, and we definitely know that we can go with them because they use XYZ model, and our risk profile says that we can use models that align with whatever that set of characteristics is. I think that that's a large part of it. And then also just the basic uh, working with folks to help them understand, especially when it comes to things like coherent nonsense and hallucinations, kind of having them interact with models and then, showing them when you give a model more information, how it answers more accurately and how you can
Mhm.
cite to the sources and stuff like that. I think those are good ways of kind of getting people more excited about this. And then additionally, I think showing people how the boring stuff can really benefit you is also a good way to do this. So one of the great examples that I like that kind of brings together predictive AI, generative AI, and search is an example of a rail company from the UK where basically they used anomaly detection to determine whether a rail line, like a segment of rail, was going to fail. And that was kind of their first step in the 2010s. And they decreased the time for maintenance. And then they got the next step. Then they used a retrieval augmented generation model to provide information to those line workers about how they should potentially resolve that maintenance issue kicked up by the anomaly detection. And now they've taken all of that and they've started to connect that to their order management system so that they can actually launch those maintenance requests almost not automatically. They draft it and they approve it, but to basically increase that flow overall. So that whole use case involves generative AI, but it's not generative AI up and down into its core. In fact, it started with a much more quote unquote traditional anomaly detection algorithm. So for enterprises that are like a little bit more reticent about this, you don't need to jump whole hog into like crazy intense applications. There's lots of really kind of incremental quick wins to be made on this. And honestly, like that's where I think a lot of the benefits are in the short and midterm around this, is looking at these incremental benefits and not, overexciting ourselves about the, sea changes that we are imagining might happen. Those will happen, but they'll happen over time.
I heard two things that hopefully get people excited or more bought into the idea. One is like alleviate the boring tasks that you don't want to do. There's
Mhm.
probably a Gen AI for that. Especially when it comes to finding for me, it's finding information. The example that I gave, I'm like, oh, I don't want to, if there's a tool that can do that for me, I will take it all day. And then the second thing is, like you said, stepping stone it. This doesn't have to feel so scary where you're like, you got to commit yourself to 5 years to something. You
Yeah.
can, like you said, find those quick wins, find those like quick efficiencies, and then build on that over time. And it's also what we talked
Mhm.
about, which is like setting KPIs. I know it's hard for people to understand or what even to start measuring, but saving time might be a good example. Saving some review cycles might be another good example, just to start understanding like, okay, I'm getting some benefits here. Here's where we might want to improve it over time and increase that. So I think that's a very important point, which is just get started and stepping stone it. See what works best for your organization. Um, this next
Yeah.
question. So kind of on the flip side of that, but what are your thoughts on how leaders will need to lead differently as AI becomes an integrated capability supporting how work is completed?
Yeah, the leadership question is very interesting because we're just kind of starting to see how this might pan out. So I would say we're kind of in the generation 1.5 of chief AI officers right now. So we had chief AI officers in like the early 2020s and late 2010s, but they were much more focused on how do I build, very intense, predictive models for like very specified purposes, maybe is for, robotic process automation or something like that. Today's AI leaders, and by today I mean the past, couple of years, are really having to navigate a much more complex landscape of business and technology and personalities, where basically the folks who are leading AI efforts are really having to, be very good collaborators across different parts of the business. So the folks that we're seeing that are being most successful with this are, really bringing, the leaders are bringing in their compliance folks. They're bringing in the line of business folks who are actually going to work with this directly. They're bringing the technical folks. They're bringing in some of the managers and frontline workers as well. So they're trying to have these broader conversations and actually account for how this is going to, affect a much larger organization. And they're also focused on, okay, not just, what are the efficiency gains and whatnot that we're going to get from this, but how am I going to affect business transformation with what I'm doing? So honestly, I think that the job of an AI leader is getting harder and more complex over time. Just as these systems are getting, much cooler and more intelligent and more complex, like the sort of management around them gets a bit more complex. And then especially if we're talking about AI leaders in organizations that have more of their own, have more technical capabilities they've built at home, those AI leaders are going to have to manage much more complex environments of combinations of model ops, data ops, financial ops, DevOps, all of these things coming together to continuously improve these AI applications, not just the stuff that goes into building them. So I think the leaders have to be, kind of AI initiatives have to be much more jack of all trades overall, and very, very collaborative embracing of change at the core.
Totally. Okay. We have time for one more question that I'm gonna try to knock this one out real quick before we wrap up. But how can Grammarly's AI integration further help while using Microsoft Copilot for text-based tasks? So this is a question we get a lot. I mean, especially if you're using Microsoft Suite or Google Suite, they definitely have their own set of AI tools, which we encourage everyone to use. I don't think it's like an either or. I think they offer their own set of benefits. But I think one thing we talk to organizations about considering is whether you're on a Microsoft Suite or a Google Suite, you are likely using tools outside of those suites as well within your own day-to-day. We've surveyed this, or we know this, from our own data, but also, surveys that we've run, which is like, I think the average application is around like 230 apps that an average enterprise organization uses. And so you are likely using tools outside of that Microsoft suite. And so something to consider is, while Copilot operates within the Microsoft system and has benefits and understands how those tools are working because it's native to Microsoft, one thing to consider is about, where Grammarly really comes in is that kind of what I was mentioning earlier about that organization-wide communication layer. You are communicating with tools outside of that. And so that's really kind of Grammarly's value and benefit, is that we kind of follow you throughout your workday as you're moving in and out of these apps. And so I think that part is going to be really important, especially as all these other tools are going to introduce their own version of AI. And so that's kind of where we see ourselves fitting in an organization. We help you make sense of your tech stack, and we are, have that high level overview of your context, being a bit more agnostic and working where you work. All right, I'm going to very quickly cover the next step slide. Thank you, Rowan, for the presentation, and also deep diving into the Q&A with everyone's questions. I know it's hot topic, as I'm sure you're familiar, so I appreciate you digging in. So next steps here. First one, please share your thoughts. We want your feedback, and we use them to improve these webinars in the future. So you'll be directed to a brief survey. So please, and in your follow-up email as well. So please take a moment to complete that. Second thing is, if you are interested in talking with a Grammarly expert around how AI, how kind of more around our enterprise offering, or generally around like how to think about these things. Like I said, we are steeped in 15 years of experience. And so there's a lot of best practices and expertise that we offer. Feel free to reach out to a Grammarly expert. We have a workflow and follow-up for that as well. And then lastly, stay in touch, follow us, and engage with us on all the social channels. And with that, thank you so much again for joining us today, wherever you are in the world. We really appreciate your time. And thank you again, Rowan, for joining us. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been fantastic.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.